Hello and welcome. I have always loved to make clothes for dollies, and these two poor dollies have been hanging around with no clothes for quite a while. So I decided it would be a really fun thing this week to get them all cleaned up and to make them some clothes. And in my mind, the best way to clothe a dolly is with a pair of overalls or a dress, and then a jumper or a cardigan. And so that is what the ambition is for both of these little babies. So I just use detergent and water to clean things. That's just pretty standard for me, but I did have available a backup magic eraser because those are my favorites for when you can't get things clean in the standard way. And I have this really good book, and the book is an old one that was given to me by a friend, and it's the Doll's Clothes Pattern Book, and it does have a lot of different dolls' clothes in it. It has it for little baby dolls and big baby dolls. It has toddler type dolls, but it also has like what it calls fashion dolls, or like Barbies and stuff. And I have used it lots of different times over the years. But this one is for an 8.5-inch doll, which is similar to the dolls that I have. The two dolls that I have here aren't actually the same size, and they have quite different bodily proportions. But I felt like they were similar enough that I would be able to use the same pattern but with some small changes. The dress pattern has a bodice and a skirt, which I am using the bodice part to sketch out some simple overalls. I've seen pants enough times to know the right sort of shape and where to add some extra fabric in. And then I'm just also drawing a really simple sleeve. It's just basically a rectangle because it didn't come with a sleeve. And this is all just guesswork. But generally speaking, if you've sewn a few pairs of clothes in your time, you know the right sort of things to make it up as you go along. And I've been especially saving fabric scraps for this because I hate it when you're sewing clothes and then there are all these completely unusable for clothes pieces, but really quite large pieces of fabric still. And so I like to keep beautiful fabrics in scraps for the making of tiny things, which can be doll clothes, but it also can be things like bags and quilts and other things as well. So especially if they're cottons and polycottons, I find them very versatile and can use them a lot. And at the moment on my sewing table, I have both my overlocker and my sewing machine set up permanently. And it's quite a luxury to have that much permanent space, but I find it makes it so much easier for me to be productive and get things done, because I have terrible pain sometimes in my back, and I find sitting quite difficult. But this way I can sew things by stealth, sneakily, whenever I can sit for a few minutes. And it's worked out quite well. And so for this, I'm just using the overlocker to finish the edges. And you can use a zigzag if you don't have one, but the overlocker is much faster at the job, obviously, because it's designed for it. I think I am at heart quite a lazy sewer. I think that the main thing in my head is quick, get it done, rather than making it perfect, which means that I have struggled in the past with things like finishing edges and changing the color of thread and things like that. And I probably still struggle with that a little bit at the moment, especially changing the color of thread. But finishing edges now is something that is really important to me, and I try my best to always find a way to finish edges properly, because the trouble is when you don't finish edges and you wash things is that they just come apart and then all your good work is undone. When I haven't had enough space to have the overlocker set up, my go-to way for finishing edges was always sewing the seams over. So after you've sewn a seam, you sew each of the seam edges over, which means that you effectively end up sewing everything 3 times, which is quite a long and slow way to make things. So now that I have the space to have the overlocker set up all the time, it's made it quite a bit simpler and quicker. So I'm just doing a try on of these overalls just to see how they fit, and it was a good fit, and so I'm putting Velcro on. And this is a Velcro branded Velcro, and it's very soft and minimal, because for dolls' clothes you really don't want something big and bulky that you might use on a bag or something else. Another option for finishing off little dolls' clothes like this is to put a little snap in the back, and I probably would prefer to have done that, but I realized I didn't have any, and because of my quick get it done nature, I couldn't possibly wait to keep making these while I acquired some, so I decided that Velcro was the best option. And generally speaking, if you're making dolls' clothes with really little people in mind, Velcro is much easier for them to put together than little snaps. Having said that though, when I was small, my favourite little dolly had this cute little pinafore style dress, and it had a snap in the back, and I just loved that dolly, and I put on and off her dress so many times. So testing this out, it fits quite well. I'm noticing here that the pants are a little wide, and so if I decide to make another pair of these in the future, I could narrow them down a little bit. But it's fitting both dollies fairly well. I feel like it suits the harder body doll slightly better, but I think that it's a nice fit on both of them. So now I am doing a dress, and I've decided to gather the skirt panels separately and add them to the bodice pieces before I join the bodice, which is not the normal way that I would put it together, but because of the way that this bodice and skirt pieces were designed, part of the sleeve attachment portion is on the skirt, so I felt like this would make it easier. Because when I'm sewing tiny dresses, or basically anything with bodices and sleeves, I really like to attach the sleeves before I seam them, which just makes it so much easier, because you're not getting stuck doing tiny little hems on sleeve edges. So that's how I've decided to put it together, and it worked fairly well. I found it quite good. So yeah, when I do sew tiny things, I never want to be sewing around for the hem of the sleeve edge. So I make sure to do those first, but then of course it requires some precision when you get to sewing it together. So I spent a bit of extra time just making sure that I had this sleeve nicely aligned. And obviously I'm being a little bit lazy, and a lot of these seams I'm not sewing first before I overlock them, but with this underarm seam I did stitch it first, because that makes the join there quite a bit sturdier, which makes it less likely to come unraveled. I remember when I was 11 or 12, I went through a dolly clothes sewing phase, and I made all these beautiful little dresses, but I hadn't yet convinced myself of the importance of when gathering for skirts, using more than one line of gathering threads. And I made this beautiful pink dress out of some scraps from my mum's sewing cupboard, and all of the gathers had twisted and I had raw edges sticking out everywhere. And ever since then, that memory is my motivation for, no matter how small the project, always use 2 rows of gathering stitches. And it just prevents them from twisting when you're sewing them in, and then when you never have any raw edges poking out, which is essential if you want to appreciate all of your hard work. Another thing that I like to think about when choosing fabrics for doll clothes is I much prefer to have lighter weight fabrics, because when you're working in a smaller scale, it is much harder and stiffer to use a heavier weight fabric. So both of these are quite lightweight cottons, which were for shirts and dresses. And now to try everything on, I decided that the dress is for the soft bodied doll and the overalls are for the hard bodied doll, and everything fits and looks quite nice. And then I went through my yarn stash and I pulled out a whole bunch of different yarns, but these two were the ones that felt the best for me. And when I knit for dollies, I do it obviously very simply with I don't use any extra shaping or anything because obviously they're dollies, but I just cast on enough stitches to sit comfortably around the neck with a loop over for a button. And then my favorite is to rib the neck, making sure to put a buttonhole at the top, and then I just increase for sleeves around the edges, and then I split for sleeves and then finish down the body. And as you can see now, I'm picking up for the sleeves. Dollies don't usually need a lot of rows on the sleeves, so I do a couple of rows and then I finish off, generally speaking, with ribbing. That is my favorite, just for simple fun cardies, but you can do a lot of other things as well. So sometimes I like to do moss stitch or other things, or a rolled hem, or anything that suits my fancy. But I think there's something really special about ribbing. I just love ribbing, and my favorite ribbing is a 2x2 rib. It just feels so lovely, and I think it also helps to pull the ends of the sleeves in a little bit, so you don't actually have to do any shaping on the sleeve, because they're so short, generally speaking, with a doll sleeve. It just makes it really simple and really cute. The hardest part of any knitting project for me, and the thing which often I get stuck on and takes longer than knitting the entire thing, is sewing the ends in. So the fact that I'm making a video for this, you're actually all my heroes, anyone who's watching this, because the fact that I was making a video for you meant that I didn't delay at all sewing the ends in. It's funny because sewing ends in isn't actually that hard. I don't know what makes it so difficult for me to motivate myself to do it, but it literally is one of the hardest parts of the process for me. So I appreciate you. I'm also just stitching a single button at the top. I think you can do more buttons for a dolly, but generally speaking, I find a single button at the top is my favorite, just because it holds it on quite nicely. And little people don't always want to be doing up thousands of buttons. Generally speaking, I find that most dollies end up naked half the time anyway with clothes, and sometimes it's just the mums who are the most excited about dressing up the babies. In the end, I decided against making a jumper, and I've made a cardigan for both of these dolls, and they actually haven't turned out the same size because I am the ultimate make it up as you go along lady, but they are quite similar. I could make some more things for these dollies, but I feel like with the two pieces of clothing they feel a little finished, but I also have some other ideas of some things that I could make for them to make them complete, because it is nice to make a dolly as like a little set, especially if you're giving it as a gift. So some of the things I've been thinking that these little dollies might need is like a little blanket, like something knitted or crocheted, maybe a little bed, like a fabric sort of, I don't know, like a bassinet, I don't know what you call it, but some sort of sleeping place is definitely a thing for a baby. So I think I might make some extra things for these babies, possibly like a little beanie or a bonnet, just so that they feel a little bit more finished. Some of my favorite buttons to use for doll clothes are like little shaped buttons, and I have a few different types of shaped buttons, and these are just some tiny little flowers which I have, and the other button I use this time are tiny little printed wooden buttons. So having some button options is really fun, and I've obviously bought these in bulk from a sewing supplier, but you can also save buttons off of old clothes or buy them at secondhand shops, which I've also done a lot in the past. Thanks so much for hanging around with me while I clothe these poor naked dollies, and if you enjoyed the video and would like to see some of the things I do in the future, I would love it if you subscribed, and if you want to leave a comment and you don't know what to say, just leave a love heart, because who couldn't resist some cute little dollies? Hopefully I'll see you next time. Bye!